Australia is the home of some giant packaging companies, Visy and Amcor. So, Aussie investors, Aussie advisors probably are familiar with a little bit about the packaging industry. So tell us about Smurfit Westrock and how it compares to some of those familiar names.
Okay, so I've been talking about Smurfit in Australia for a couple of weeks. The pleasing thing for me is that no one's heard of it.
Yeah, okay, well good, I'm not alone.
I talked at the beginning about the value of boring companies.
Yeah.
Like finding things that people are not excited about at all, not in the press, that's great to me. This company makes corrugated cardboard boxes. Like it has a very, very boring business. Very hard to get excited about this. But I'll give you the backstory because it's important to understanding why we're excited today. Smurfit Westrock is the result of a merger which was kind of put together over the last couple of years. It was originally Smurfit Kappa in Europe and Westrock in the US. Smurfit Kappa in Europe was run by a guy called Tony Smurfit, so he had his name above the door. Within European context, I'd followed that business for about 15 years and seen Tony and his team do a tremendous job in a boring, low-growth industry. And the way they had done that was being very good industrial operators and understanding that the box business is cyclical. So sometimes demand outstrips supply, sometimes supply outstrips demand, and so returns follow that pattern. In the good times, Tony didn't get too excited. He invested in his operations and made them more efficient. So put in the best capital equipment he could find, really worked on optimizing the kind of production footprint for any given region to make sure that the right plants were making the right boxes. And so he had better margins than all his peers and better returns on capital. In the bad times, he would go to his competitors who were distressed, who had typically overexpanded, and buy those assets well below replacement cost. Okay, so he wasn't increasing overall industry capacity, but he was getting good assets at really good prices, understanding that the cycle would turn at some point and the returns would come back. And then he was able to go and improve those assets as well. And that playbook had been rolled out for 15 or so years within Europe quite consistently and kind of, he'd really built a good reputation as a good industrial operator. 2 years ago, I think Tony looked across the Atlantic and saw that Westrock was a good opportunity. And so it was there for a couple of reasons. One is there had been a big cycle in the US corrugated box market. So during COVID, everyone sits at home and orders everything they can on Amazon. And so box demand goes up. A lot of the packaging is required for this kind of remote delivery. So box capacity was added. The industry returns were really healthy. 2 years later, when everyone goes back to the mall, box demand dropped off. You also had a bit of a kind of like an industrial recession in the US. So, lots of physical goods, the demand came down a bit. So returns came right down. And so, just generally the industry was in a bit of a low point. And Westrock had been a problematic business, not because the assets weren't good, but because it had been poorly managed. And it had been poorly managed for, I think 2 or 3 iterations of management. And so shareholders were quite pessimistic about the outlook for Westrock at this. You had a business that was cyclically depressed and had been a poor reputation with the management team, which was frankly well earned. Tony looked across the Atlantic and said, well, I've got this playbook on how to improve industrial packaging assets. And I think the assets are good. He actually had some history with owning the assets a long time ago as part of kind of different M&A. And he said the cycle's low. This is a great time to strike. And so he proposed a merger that ended up going through, I think, a couple of years, like 18 months ago. And so today what we have is two big sets of assets, one in Europe, one in North America, both of which are somewhat cyclically depressed. The assets in North America are actually bigger now than the ones in Europe, but there's a real scope to improve those. And so I think, we trust that the Smurfit team can take the playbook they've executed in Europe really well, bring it to the US, and will drive much better returns from those assets in the future. So that's promising to us, and it's a reason why investors are mispricing the situation, is they're not really willing to look through the near-term cyclical downturn and appreciate how good the Smurfit team have been in Europe to think what the Westrock business could look like in the future. There's a kind of additional leg to this, which is the US market has meaningfully consolidated over time. So it used to be quite fragmented in terms of box suppliers. There's now 3 big guys who basically control the market. And so on top of that, I think industry returns will be better because typically when big industrial businesses or industries consolidate, returns generally come up because you have more discipline. So if you are executing a good turnaround as the cycle recovers in an industry which is fundamentally improved, earnings could be much better than people are anticipating today. So we have all of that, and then we look at the valuation and we find that Smurfit Westrock trades at like a 30-40% discount to its peers.
Oh, wow.
So you say, if earnings are really, earnings growth impresses to the upside and that discount closes, so that seems like quite a constructive setup. And I don't have to bet on the timing of the turnaround either because it has a good balance sheet. So I'm not panicked here saying, well, I really need this to move by the end of this year or next year because they've got debt that needs to be refinanced, and I don't know what happens if they can't access that. They're going to raise equity. That's all off the table because the balance sheet is solid. So a good management team, good balance sheet, a non-time sensitive turnaround, but there's some uncertainty near term. That works quite well for my investing framework.
Yeah.
And then the icing on the cake is there is no way that you can incorporate AI into a cardboard box.
Wow, famous
Really?
last words. Yeah. Maybe in the production process, maybe.
So we can maybe that it becomes slightly better business because they can use AI better than peers, but I'm not going to bank on that. But if I think about, where is sentiment around cardboard boxes versus anything that touches AI or tech, it's got to be polar opposite. So I don't have to bet on tariffs because boxes are consumed locally. They don't really cross borders. I don't have to worry about sentiment unwinding in hot areas of the market. This is something that's off the radar, but I think is just intrinsically very good value today.